I'm Alvin Mason. I happen to be Commissioner of Augusta Richmond County for the last 7 years. For 2 of those years, I've served as the Mayor Pro Tem after 1 year on the Commission, and from what I'm told, within the history of this government, there's never been a first-year Commissioner elected as Mayor Pro Tem after only 1 year being on the Commission. I don't know if that says a lot about myself, but it certainly says a lot about the colleagues that voted me in on a unanimous vote after 1 year being on the Commission. I've served 20 years in the United States Army. I started my career here in 1984 as a private at Fort Gordon, out at Brim's Barracks. I retired in 2004 after serving this great nation for over 20 years in several different countries and, of course, across the United States of America. Very proud of that, honorably discharged. And in 2004, after retirement, I also opened up a series of barbecue businesses out in South Augusta area. Then I've got some contract work on at Fort Gordon to help soldiers again. In 2007, I became a government civilian for the federal government in the contract management office at Fort Gordon. The importance of that is this: as a contract management individual, we were responsible for the procurement of IT services for our soldiers so that they could go across Big Army and do our mission, and we were responsible for getting them that type of training. I also served as an instructor as well to our soldiers that have defended this nation as well. In 2007, I became interested, well actually in 2006, I became interested in Augusta Richmond County government based on the leadership that I'm accustomed to in the Army, and we call it the art or influence. This is our definition of leadership: the art or ability of influencing others in such a manner as to obtain their willing obedience in order to accomplish the mission. Now, what's important about that is there's an art form and there's skill sets there that are necessary to bring diverse groups together to be able to accomplish the mission. I'll tell you how important that is. When you talk about serving your country, we've got to communicate effectively with real dialogue, bringing diverse groups together so that we can come home and be with our families instead of being viewed by our families across the casket or in the body bag. That's how serious this is to me, and that's the reason why I decided to run for commission. There was a portrayal, or certainly a perception, if not a reality, that we were dealing with a dysfunctional government and leadership that dealt more on color of personalities than performance. And so I thought that I could offer something to the table with the leadership that I'm familiar with. And I hope that during those 7 years, even though we may have had some differences of opinion on certain issues and agenda items, that I've tried to do that to the best of my ability as I've been taught through great leaders in the United States Army. And so I became Commissioner in 2008, became the Mayor Pro Tem in 2009, again elected Mayor Pro Tem in 2010. And so for the last 7 years, like as I said, I've been serving as a County Commissioner for this government. Some of the things I'm very, very proud of in terms of my stance on issues, being fiscally responsible, having a public transit system that's comprehensive and robust that meets the needs not only of the citizens but the businesses here in Augusta Richmond County as well. Public safety has been extremely important. I worked very, very closely with the former Sheriff Ronnie Strength on those items that he needed in terms of resources to make his operations successful. And being the public safety chairman responsible for our first responders and our public safety folks, firemen and sheriff's office, I've worked very, very closely with Chief James as well as Sheriff Richard Roundtree, Dominic Nutter, 911, to try to ensure that they have the resources necessary to keep Augusta Richmond County safe for its citizens. So I'm proud of that fact. So those are a few things that I want to be able to share with you. I think most of you know that we've done, not me individually, but collectively as a team, we've done fairly well in terms of job creation here in Augusta Richmond County. You know about the Cabela's and Costco's and Starbucks and Pigment, our various other entities that we have that have come to Augusta Richmond County in the last 7 years. I'm very proud that during the 7 years that we've had some of the most phenomenal growth in the history of Augusta during the 7 years that I've been on commission. And I'm very, very proud of that, irrespective of the fact that sometimes it perceives, there's a perception that we're divided. So having said that, I just wanted to share those few things with you early on. I'm certainly prepared and ready to answer whatever questions that you may have to the best of my ability. If I don't know a particular answer right now, I'll be more than happy to get back with you. But I think that I'll do the best job that I can in answering whatever questions, concerns, issues, comments that you have. But I'm proud to say that the service that I've given for the last 7 years have been what I consider selfless service, not selfish service. I think people know where I stand when it comes to being accountable and holding other people accountable. I think that's extremely critical in this government. And I'm looking forward to becoming the next mayor of Augusta Richmond County on May 20th. And one of the major things that I think that is important as I move forward towards this particular goal is to enforce the laws and ordinances. That is part of the responsibility of the mayor that you don't hear a whole lot about. And I think that's extremely critical, going directly to our derelict buildings and homes and the way that our city is structured and so forth. So the laws and ordinances is one of the main issues that is a responsibility of the mayor as a chief executive officer. And that's where I can effect great change immediately by making that a priority to address those issues and hold people accountable in the government to make sure that those issues are done. So that's a little brief synopsis of who I am, what I'm about, and certainly I'm prepared and willing to answer whatever questions you may have of me at this time.
So you're opposed to the SPLOST, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I am.
Why is that?
Well, for several reasons. Reason number one, and I think the most important reason, is that I believe with all my heart and with all indications that state law says that what we're doing right now at this particular time with the SPLOST is not absolutely 100% legal. And what I mean by that is that there's not, according to state law, there's not supposed to be two SPLOSTs operating at the same time. And someone will say, well, it won't be two operating at the same time. If you look at state law, it says that the recommended way of putting a SPLOST package together is to do it 1 year from the time of the expiration date of your current SPLOST if you have one in place. We currently have one in place, and it does not expire till the second quarter of 2016. We're now in the third quarter of 2014. So we're well outside of that 1 year recommendation from the SPLOST. Secondly, 80 days after the election, or somewhere thereabouts, is when the SPLOST is supposed to come into effect. 80 days after May would be August, September timeframe of 2014. Hence, you could not have two going at the same time. Now, that's state law. It's not Alvin Mason's law, so I'm just talking from a legal standpoint. I don't believe that it passed the muster. In addition to that, though, and just as importantly, I'm not in favor of some of the private entities that will receive these types of monies, because also in the state law, it talks about who can be eligible for these types of monies and what it could be used for. And I think if we're not flat out illegal with it, I think if we may have some moral or ethical issues as it relates to whom it is that we give monies to, be it private colleges or arts groups or what have you. Now, having said that, I don't want anyone to mistake the fact that, well, he's against art, or he's against curing cancer, or he's against helping out local institutions, bring themselves up by the bootstraps. Nothing could be further from the case. The fact of the matter is, as a soldier and as a enforcer and a participant in laws, I try to just do what the law says do. I try not to put my own spin on it. Thirdly, and in addition to the other two things that I've mentioned, I do not believe that it had to be this quick in terms of how we moved forward with it. We put artificial barriers in place that said, let's move quickly because GRU may need $8 million to move forward, and there's been some discussion even in your own newspaper whether that was legitimate or illegitimate in terms of whether we needed to do that right now. But the fact of the matter is that since 2010, we had 10 special call meetings in 2010. We had 12 in 2011. Then we went on to have 28 and then 33 in 2012, and 28 in 2013. We've already had 12, and we're only through 4 months of April. A special call meeting is not for stuff that you can do during a normal business time frame. It's for doing special things that you normally cannot do. So to be able to call a special call meeting, there's specific purposes for that. I believe that those special call meetings were not of the nature that the spirit of the law says that they ought to be. And in addition to that, as mayor, I would certainly consult with the governing authority, the body who's going to make a decision, to check on their availability, because if we're not familiar with the charter, we all should know that a commission is a part-time function. It's not a full-time function. And many of us have other jobs that actually pay our bills. And so we have to have time to be able to coordinate those types of things. And so if it was absolutely necessary for these meetings to be called, then I think that we could have checked with commissioners and said, well, okay, well, we can do it at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock where we can have more participation. The very fact that, yes, I did miss meetings, but the very fact that you had 4 meetings where there was only one commissioner lets you know that it wasn't an Alvin Mason problem. It was a problem with the entire commission. And we only had one time when we had 6 commissioners there, and that was the day of the vote. Okay, so from that perspective, if you look at that, you know that there's some particular problems with that if what we're trying to do is be transparent. And so transparency was an issue for me. And I found it very, very difficult, and this is the final thing on that, I found it very, very difficult to support something when you had outside entities come all the way up through Thursday, February 27th, up to 12 o'clock, and then at 1:27 on February 27th, you call a meeting for 2 o'clock on February 28th, which you just met the state law of the 24-hour turnaround, just met the state law. And then the initial, and I've got the minutes here, talked about this isn't necessarily a vote, we're just going to come together, but then it ends up in a vote for passing. But you've had less than, well, just a little bit over 24 hours to call that meeting and didn't check on the availability of commissioners. If that's so important, and it is important, if that's so important, then I believe that we ought to, especially with the governing body, consider the individuals that have been elected by their citizens to come up and be a part of the decision-making process. And we could have easily did that even if we felt it was a need to have these meetings so quickly and back-to-back the way that it was. When you see the first meeting, you only got one. The second meeting, you only got one. You got to do something different. You can't do the same thing. And so one begins to understand that there may be a perception that maybe there wasn't a will to have everyone know exactly what was going on. That would be unfortunate.
So there's a scenario where you could be elected mayor and the SPLOST could pass. So if you're mayor and the SPLOST passes, do you then challenge it?
No, here's the situation on that, and I'm glad that you brought that up because that's a very good question, and people ask me, well, you've got to be for it. Well, no, I don't, because right now, I'm the only one that sits in this position that is currently a commissioner of my district, and I have to address the will of my district, but then I'm running for a position that means you've got to address the will of the entire city, and I'm the only one that has those concerns or those issues right now. As I sit right now, my job, because I'm not mayor, my job right now is to do the job of the commission. And so for that purpose, I am against SPLOST, no question about it. If the will of the people says that this is what we want, and I become the mayor of Augusta Richmond County, my job is to address the will of the people as a whole. And that's exactly what I would do. But I just want to make sure that you understand I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, so to speak, and there's no other candidate that falls into this category because I am an elected official. I take my job seriously, and a bulk of those that I've talked to in my community that have elected me to represent them have made a stance or have taken a stance as it relates to SPLOST, and so have I. So there's the difference. But as mayor, and certainly if it passes, then we're going to do the best that we can. But we're going to learn from this because we won't have those types of meetings haphazardly as such, where less of the commission is available to address the needs of their community. I just think there's something fundamentally wrong with that when we're elected by a constituent or electorate that put us here, to not have the opportunity to really be a part of the discussions and hear from the community. we never had a public forum for the community to speak. And this is what I find odd. The community is the ones that have to go out, that we need to convince to go out and vote for this package. But then you don't have opportunities for the community to come out. I'm not talking about presenters who's looking for money. I'm talking about the community that want to see certain things done so that I can feel comfortable about going and voting yes. Not one meeting like that. Not a single one. That's a problem.
A few times I've heard you touch on how you are CEO, or as mayor, you're the CEO and enforcer of the codes and ordinances. How would you go about that? It's just not something, I don't guess we've seen with the current mayor. What would you do to become that
Well,
person?
first and foremost, I become that just by virtue of the charter gives you that authority. And so you've got to understand what you have the authority to do and what you have the authority not to do. So I don't want to do anything that I don't have the authority to do. Now, having said that, given the authority, it becomes how you're going to execute your plan to be able to be within the rights of your authority. The fact of the matter is, from that standpoint, you have to assess the situation of where you are. And luckily, I've been up there to be able to assess that. I know much of what already divides this commission and what brings us together. So as a chief executive officer and talking about enforcing laws and ordinances, having sat there for 7 years, the city administrator has been primarily responsible for ensuring that the day-to-day operations of the city go forward. That's not a commission function. We set policy. The mayor's office, that's the other one that would be there for the majority of the time, overseeing it and seeing what's going on within the government. So from those two entities, unfortunately, we're in the process of hiring a new city administrator, and these are things that we've asked for in terms of ensuring that him or her is holding people accountable in these divisions, be it code enforcement, be it license inspection, and these type of things when it comes to enforcing ordinances. If they need some professional development, we'll be more than happy to give it to them. If after professional development they can't do the job, maybe we need to replace folks and put people in place that can. So it becomes a matter of priority. And even in here in the charter, it says the mayor sets the priority for the city. That is a priority of mine. That's number one priority. And it goes straight to a lot of the issues that we have here in the community with these derelict homes, buildings, and so forth, be it downtown, Harrisburg, Somerville, Old Town, wherever. These, not enforcing the laws of getting these buildings up to code and off the books, that's been a huge Achilles heel for this community. So what I would do, a couple of things. One, we would have an assessment to make sure that people understand what their role in this government is, the same way that I did in the military. I'm not going to ask you to go out and climb a mountain if you're not a mountain climber. I'm setting you up for failure and not for success. So we've got to understand where the buck stops and who is responsible for what. Once we've done that, and that reorganization didn't take care of that, once we've done that, we're going to have weekly come to Jesus meetings as far as where we're at and where we're going. So we've got to have some goals and aspirations and then some courses of action of how we're going to get there. As you well know, we've got a lot of department heads who are making six figures and this and that, and that's fine, but we're going to hold people accountable for the job that they're supposed to do, and you'll see a better government as a result of that. But the mayor is the enforcement authority of laws and ordinances. It has to be a priority of that individual. He or she must take that very, very seriously and ensure that our planning and development, who now is in control of license and inspection and code enforcement, has the resources necessary, because as you know, we've given like 4 additional positions to planning and zoning so that they can go out and do the code enforcement type of stuff. So we're currently, even right now, doing those things that are necessary to be successful when it comes to the mayor being able to enforce those laws. Now, I will say this, you don't enforce it by because I said so. I initially mentioned about the leadership, the art or ability of influencing, because when you are able to do that, a person will do their job, they'll do it to a higher standard. But when you do it, you say, because I said so. Well, right now you created an adversarial situation. And even though they may have the skill sets to do it, the way he said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do it. I'll just barely do it. So that's extremely important. I think when you see it from the top, Susan, which is what I've seen from 27 years in the military, when you see it from the top, and the top is holding people accountable, and the top is doing the exact same thing, it funnels down as you go down that chain of command. So having that communications, and I think having you probably more than anybody else seen on this commission where we get information at the last minute and information flow is not happening amongst commissioners. These are the things that help to bog us down. When we do that, I think it becomes a lot easier to enforce laws and ordinances, but you've got to know what laws and ordinances currently are not being enforced, which I do, and then what directories are responsible for those laws and ordinances that are not being addressed appropriately. And then we've got to be able to put courses of action or plans of action in place to be able to address that. And that's management, and that's really the crux of where we are and some of the problems that I've seen in the 7 years, and even things that I've advocated for but haven't been able to get that passed through at least a six-member commission. But it can happen, and it will happen under a Mason administration, because that's a priority of mine. And remember, the mayor sets the priority of the city. That is number one priority with me, first and foremost, because that's something that I have control over and that I can affect, to understand the laws and ordinances and enforce them appropriately, which gives me the authority to do so.
Well, kind of on that note, as you know, and this is kind of a two-part question, but as you know, some elected officials gathered recently to talk about Augusta's image and how it's being perceived by other people, other entities. So, from your perspective, does Augusta have an image issue, or how is it being perceived by the outside? What kind of issues is it dealing with as far as representation and how Augusta is put out there? And as mayor, since the mayor is really like the spokesperson and the face for the city and its cheerleader, what's your style, and how would you go about advocating for the city and kind of controlling that image almost?
Well, first and foremost, you can't control something that you don't have the authority to control. So I can't control our image, because that's painted by so many external variables, to include news media, print media, neighborhood associations, what have you, just regular citizens. That's controlled from that perspective, because a person's perception becomes their reality. So the question really becomes, how do we change perception of how we're viewed? But the reality of the situation is we're nowhere near what we're perceived to be. And I'll tell people this all the time, and you see it, Susan, 90% or more of what we pass unanimously, 10 of us. We don't talk about that, though, because that's not newsworthy. But there are some things that causes us to have some spirited discussion in terms of agenda items. So at the end of the day, I don't control how we're viewed, and even the mayor our current mayor doesn't control how we're viewed. We have two totally different personalities, but we're still viewed a certain way. You see what I mean? So that's why I tell you that the mayor doesn't control that. If our current mayor right now had his way, based on his views, everything, we want to look at this, the way that it is, everything's clear, everything's good, and all like that. But that's not happening. But that's the type of person that he is. It doesn't make him wrong. He has that type of style. I'm more of a hands-on approach, and just being truthful about the issues of government, because government belongs to the people. But here's what I'll tell you, Tracy, as it relates to this. Much of what happens on this commission and how it's printed or how it's viewed on TV and so forth is because of the fact that I believe, this is my personal belief, that there is a disconnect, and there has been a disconnect for decades, between the mayor's office and the county commission. The county commission is your regulatory body and your governing body. The mayor's office is, some people say cheerleader, it's much more than that, but the mayor is not the one that sets policy and do those types of things. Now, the reason why I say that there's a disconnect, because the mayor will come off the street if they have no experience and so forth, and they'll have a way of which they think it should go. And then you learn some of the rules. Okay, if you get 6 votes this way, you can do this, you can do that. But the unique position that I find myself in, having been a county commissioner, is that I clearly understand what divides us and those things that we can agree upon. No other mayor, no other candidate for mayor can come in and say that, because they haven't been in those meetings for 7 years. They don't know exactly what those issues are. A lot of those issues that come out publicly that gives us perception are legitimate issues. When you're talking about transparency, when you're talking about hurried processes and these type of things, this is where you get your arguments at. You know how you quell those arguments? You don't have those hurried meetings. You don't have the lack of transparency at the last minute and give to a commissioner because you've talked to 6 others and said, pass this. So you'll see the difference immediately, because you're dealing with the root of the problem. And so it doesn't go to controlling how we're viewed, but it certainly goes to a way of changing perhaps the perception of how we're viewed, because there is a specific list of things that divide us, that cause us to have these types of conversations, and it goes on and on and on. As Susan knows, sometimes it goes on and on and on. But a lot of it is legitimate in terms of whether or not we're getting information in a timely fashion and the way that we proceed. So my processes will be to no end, because he or she may know more than the person that's in control of the meeting. Robert's Rules of Order and then the charter determines how we operate. There are any number of things that could be done procedurally and legally to curtail some of what you see. But that's not a commission function. There's only one person that's in charge of the meetings. That's the mayor. Someone coming off the street right now, first of all, would have to get up on Robert's Rules of Orders. They also have to get up on this charter. I did this for 2 years as Mayor Pro Tem. I've been sitting there for 7 years as Commissioner. I don't have to get up on the charter. I know what's there. There's certain things that I've used. So, in order to be an effective player, you must know the rules of the game. You can't play football with basketball rules, or basketball with football rules, because just as soon as you pick up the ball and run with it, infraction, whistle, there's a penalty to pay. You've got to understand what governs you. So that will help the way that you're viewed as well. Having an astute knowledge of the charter that governs the processes of this governing authority, and that will help with the way that we're viewed too. I don't have a silver bullet though, I can tell you that right off the bat, and everything's not going to be hunky-dory. I'm not saying that at all, but you've got to understand where the root of the problem is, and that comes with what commissioners feel that they're being short-sighted on, and this is all commissioners, what they feel they're being short-sighted on, and address that appropriately with courses of action to kind of take those away so that we can get to the real business of doing the business of the city.
So I'm not supposed to ask you a question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You know, I'm intrigued by the statements that you made earlier about your military career and the fact that, you know, you believe that this leader should be a person of influence. And I believe so strongly that leaders don't have to be in leadership roles.
That's right.
That you can demonstrate leadership even as just one of the players on a team. And so it brings a question to mind, which is, in your role as a commissioner, having said that you observed all these things, share with us an instance where you actually used the influence that you say you're going to use as mayor to bring the commission together, to quell this perception that most people in the community have of its being racial and divided and unable to make decisions effectively. Give me an example of something that you've done to really influence that and to change the course of action because of it.
Sure, that's extremely simple. When I came up on this commission in 2008, I'm going to take the Judicial Center as an example. That Judicial Center, which is now the John H. Ruffin Courthouse of Augusta County Judicial Center, for almost 15 years, that had been voted on. It was never able to move. People couldn't determine where it was going to be, what it was going to be, the whole thing. And you had for lack of a better word, you had a racial divide. It was 5-5. No, we're not going to do it this way. Yes, we're going to do it this way. What I'm proud to say is when I came up in 2008 with my contracting experience, I got my master's certification from George Washington University in contract management operations. And here's why that's so important, especially important for the mayor. The mayor's the only one that signs a contract, not a commission. That's first and foremost. But going back to your point, the thing is that when this situation came up and it came down for a vote, and I never will forget this, we were meeting and Bill Koch and some of his folks were there, and some folks from Erie and so forth, and they were concerned that, well, here we are 15 years later and we still can't get past this impasse. And it was a thought process. I never will forget the aura in the room that day. It was sort of sad because Don Grantham didn't make the meeting that day. He was in Florida on some personal business. And there was a thought process that there wouldn't be enough votes there to be able to move this again. And so I'm looking at this information and I'm looking at the type of contract vehicles that we're talking about using, and then a contract manager at risk and all of this. And I realize that there are several commissioners that don't know what they're talking about. And so what I did was I gathered with the commissioners that didn't know what they were talking about, and I explained this contract vehicle that they're using to put on contract and the pros and the cons of how this vehicle could be utilized to get us where we need to go. And after a short meeting, I addressed some specific things with specific individuals, kind of bring them up to speed in layman's terms that they could understand. And then I came back in and I said to Bill Koch, this has been a situation that has divided Augusta for a number of years. And here's what I'm willing to do. And I've explained to a lot of my colleagues in terms of the contract vehicle that you're using. No matter what has happened in the past, there's an opportunity today to change that. There's an opportunity today. And I've explained these various contract mechanisms, the scope of work, the criteria that's involved in that, how the financing and the marketing that you're using and how you come up with your numbers. And then I pointed out some specific things that I had some issues with that I wanted them to address. And they did address it. We even made some minor changes as a result of that. But it came time for the vote, and everybody's on pins and needles. Now, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to go. Now, remember, we're missing one person, and that one person was very much in favor of moving this forward, and that's Don Grantham. That vote was 9-0. Of something that kept us stagnant for 16 years almost. That vote was 9-0. Now, should Alvin Mason take credit for all of that? No. But I was an integral part of that for bringing understanding to a level where people can understand it. See, the thing is that becoming a county commissioner, you don't have to have any skill sets. I don't say that facetiously. I mean, that's just the way the charter is written. You live in the state for 2 years. You live in your district for 1. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to have a high school degree. You don't have to know anything about economics or business. And you can be a commissioner handling $750 million of taxpayers' money. I've never seen a corporation that would allow that to happen. Of course, this is city government, but you wouldn't do that in a corporation. We're like a board of trustees, if you will. You're not going to have somebody on that doesn't have any background on anything, or pastors a church, or supplies wood. You've got to be able to have these skill sets. So what I did was I utilized those skill sets that I have, that I was taught, and that I have the credentials for. And I shared that with those. It didn't make them lesser people. They were just not knowledgeable about that area. And I shared that knowledge to let them know if you don't go with this contract management at risk, or if you don't go with the time and materials, and you go with just a full contract here, then we're going to lose out X millions of dollars, and then I got to show them why. Oh, wow, I don't want to do that. No, you don't. So you've got to make a choice. Which way do you want to go? That is a perfect example early on. That may be what got me a Mayor Pro Tem the next year. I'm not sure as I stop and think about it now. But that's what happened early on in the process, my first year up on that commission, to bring something that divided us. If y'all remember this was very divisive in our community. And the mayor even mentioned the other area. I remember you the one who made the motion that we go ahead and move the judicial center. I did. And now it's built. It's a beautiful facility. And we're utilizing that to the best of our ability, but that would still potentially be a thorn in the side of Augusta-Richmond County, if not just communications. I can't impress upon you how important communications is. that brings people up to standard and make them feel like they're a part of the process instead of isolating them. It doesn't feel good to be isolated, especially when people put you there. You may not agree with a person's personality, but if their people put them there in that position, they're there for a purpose. So then we got to embrace their difference by meeting them where they are to help them, bring them along to where they need to be and feel comfortable about the decisions that they make. I've done that for 27 years. As commissioner, I've done it. As mayor pro tem, I've done it. And certainly as mayor, I'll do it because you're responsible to the entire city. You don't have to be restricted like I am right now, like the charter says. And let me tell you this. The charter says, the first thing the charter says is the commission is divided. Everybody want to talk about one Augusta. There is one Augusta, but the charter, your governing authority, and there's some fallacies in this charter, I hope we could do something with it. It says the commission is divided into 10 separate districts by the electorate that puts you in. So it's no wonder that I fight for District 4, someone fights for District 2 or District 3 and 7, because that's what your governing authority says. It's divided. So knowing that, a person who's going to sit in this seat want to say, well, we should all come together. Well, you're going against the charter, number one. Okay, so we're divided. You got to understand that we're divided. And then from that perspective, we can now try to come together to try to pass agenda items to the best of our ability, understanding that there will still be times where, for your community, if you're going to vote the will of your people that placed you there and gave the trust to put you there, you might be on the opposite end of the spectrum as a commissioner. You may not be personally, but my personal opinion doesn't matter when it comes to executing my professional duties as Augusta Richmond County Commissioner for those that elected me into office. So that's critical, and it still goes back to communications.
So what would you do? You alluded to the fact that our citizens elect people who are not potentially the right, I'm being careful in the use of words, they potentially do not have the right skill sets to hold those positions. What would you advocate that we would do to educate the community with regard to the importance of having folks who do have the right skill sets as their commissioners, and then what policies and procedures would you be able to influence to make sure that happened and we change the current way that that's done?
Well, again, I want to speak from a professional standpoint. Professionally, this charter does not give me the authority to do that,
right,
first and foremost. But what can happen, and let me tell you how a charter changes. A charter changes, and this is the fallacy of this charter, with 7.5 votes. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know about half a person. Okay, so you can't go below that. You can't say 7 then, because you got to at least meet the 7.5 or higher. So you need 8 commissioners to change, and there's stuff wrong with this thing. Trust me. I mean, just think about the people that put it together. Well, maybe I shouldn't go there. But the point is that this is there's some issues with this charter. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the charter is perfect. It's not. But this is our governing authority. It takes 7.5, 8 people to change this charter. Come on one accord and say, hey, look, we know that there's a lot in here that needs to change that causes us to be the way that we are, whatever the case may be. Let's change it. That's one way. That's on the commission. It's called home rule. The other way is through the state legislative delegation. You've got to get the majority of the state legislature, that's our House of Representatives and our senators, to be able to do a change at the state level and address some of the issues that bog us down in this charter. And just like any good business, you're going to look at your business plan and you're going to see what's working, what's not working, and you're going to tweak it and amend it and so forth. We need to do the same thing here. So that's the first thing. The other piece of it is that we've got to include, not preclude or disclude, we've got to include the public. It's so hard to get an open records request through this government till it's a shame. It's so hard. Most of the time we go back in these backdoor meetings, which I think, let me see how I got to be politically correct here, which I think should be done out front. that there's not a real need to go behind a closed door and have that conversation. And so the point to that is that we need to be inclusive of our citizens, not keep them out of government. We need to be more open. We need to be more transparent. Now, specifically, Alvin Mason as county commissioner, for the last 7 years, I've had a district breakfast. It's called a community information breakfast that I do at Gracewood Community Center for my constituents. So when I'm talking about transparency and open government, this is not just a political buzzword. This is something that I've already done. For 5 straight years, I did it every month. And then the economy got bad, so now for the last 2 years, I've done it quarterly. I've had $1,000 that come from a vendor that helped with that. But other than that, all that other money comes directly out of my pocket. A vendor helped through their community initiative program, which is what they do. But other than that, that money has come from Alvin Mason. I've spent over $45,000 in 7 years giving back to this community. And because that's how serious I am. On a salary, that's $14,000 a year, by the way. Okay, so I've basically given back 3 years of my commission salary doing these community information breakfasts, not using a gas card since my first year, and not having an office in which to do business out of. Most people don't know we don't even have an office or a telephone, so we get a government cell phone to be able to do business. Some people complain about that. How am I going to do business without a phone? Okay, so from that perspective, that was for the purposes of encompassing our district and allowing them to know what's going on. Within that, they didn't just hear from Alvin Mason. I brought in the school superintendent, sheriff, other elected officials, educational representatives to be a part of that and to hear what's going on and hold folks that you've elected accountable. That's transparency and that's accountability. I'm the only one that's done that for the last 7 years. Now, Bill Lockett has done it since he's come up in the last 4 years, but there's not another commissioner that does that. That's extremely critical to understand the core of who Alvin Mason is and understanding that we want them to be a part of this government. I think that contributed to me getting about 65% in my last election. In political terms, that's a mandate. You don't get that high. Generally, you're 50, 51, 52%. But 63, 64% is a lot. I take pride in that, and I believe a lot of that was because I did have that open government. I did have that transparency. I did include citizens in the process. So we got commissioners in the process. We got citizens in the process. The mayor can set whatever meetings that he wants. I will have a monthly meeting myself as a mayor. I'm not talking about a prayer breakfast. I'm talking about a meeting where we can hear from our citizens and inform our citizens of the state of the city of where we are. I don't have to wait for a year to come every year to give an overall one. I will do that. But I will continue to give community updates, be it on Warren Road one month, Diamond Lakes the other, down in East Augusta next, because we want to be inclusive of this whole process. It's nothing that I would start when I become mayor. I've been doing it for 7 years. So that's how we include citizens in that process as well. And then have an open government. I do believe, if you look at North Augusta, if you look at Columbia County, if you look at our school board, the meetings are in the evening time. They're not at 2 o'clock when everybody's at work. It gives the perception that we're trying to keep citizens out of the know. By and large, when you look at the 168 counties in Augusta, Richmond County, most or in the state of Georgia, most have their meetings, the highest percentage have their meetings in the evening, where people can be a part of their government, where you can have folks that work and feed their families off of regular pay and then be able to come. And then you throw in all these special call meetings, in addition to the regular meetings that you've got to be at, on a $14,000 salary, which is McDonald's money. That doesn't cut the mustard. That's what allows, and goes back to your how does it appear, that's what allows us to appear differently. Because we can't continue to do the same thing that we've always done, even though we've had some successes. We can help out from where we are today by having the knowledge of what bothers us, the knowledge of what divides us, and then the commonality of what brings us together. So commissioners, keeping people informed, having them a part of the government, and we need to have blue ribbon committees on any number of things, from education to race relations. Remember, they did away with that a few years back. These are things that are legitimate that will help this community rise above where we are today, so that we can be better tomorrow. And that's including our citizens. And when our citizens groups come to speak to us, to let us know that there's issues, we ought to give them a listening ear. because they're out there, they're on the ground, they understand the issues that are going on in the community. So I just believe that communications, at the end of the day, it's not a 100% silver bullet cure-all, but it's certainly better to know than not know. For too long, we've been out of the know. So I'm of the opinion that when we know better, we can do better. But if we continue down the path that we've continued down with lack of transparency and lack of accountability, then we're going to continue to see those same things that have plagued us for decades. That does give some, not only in the community but outside of our community, a black eye as far as Augusta, Richmond County is concerned.
You mentioned changing the charter. So you'd be in favor of changing the charter, or what would you change?
Well, I'd be in favor of amending the charter, a change, an amendment to the charter. There's certain areas that, to me, that need to be looked at. And one, if you have a situation where I want to talk specifically about the mayor's position, if I will, for a minute. If you have a situation like, for instance, with the mayor who does not have a vote or a veto, and people say, well, how important is that? Well, it depends on the person sitting in the seat, actually, and what leadership styles that they have, what priorities they're putting in place, and what it is that they can influence. I don't necessarily need a vote or veto to make me effective in that position. If one came, then that would be great as well, because that allows you to govern in a different aspect. But Alvin Mason can pretty much govern under whatever is there, but there's some specific things as it relates to the makeup of our government and how it's in charge. For instance, our city administrator. I personally believe that's a problem, that we have an administrator versus a city manager. An administrator by nature is there to administrate. He's not there to manage. In other words, he or she does not have hired and firing authority over department heads and things like this. But they're the person that's down there working on a daily basis to see whether or not, and if they're assessing them appropriately. And that's a whole other issue that we have in the government. We need assessment done, evaluations. If they're assessing appropriately, then you may not have situations to where things are going on for years at a time because a person is not being assessed, and then a person don't have the authority, the commission hires me. Well, you're going to have to find 6 votes to get rid of me or whatever. It could cause a complacency there. So what we want to do, we want to have the best of the best, try to bring the best of the best in at all positions. But if you have an administrator who has to work with all the department heads, but you don't have any authority over any of them, in a sense, that kind of handcuffs you in terms of because you're not evaluating them. And let me tell you something, since I've been on this commission for 7 years, I've never done one evaluation, not even one on city administrator. That's a flaw that's in this system that needs to change.
So give the administrator, make the city manager having hiring.
I believe the city administrator, not administrator, I believe, first of all, I believe we ought to be a city manager.
Right.
Because the administrator does administrate, a manager manages and then has hired and firing authority. I believe that would be appropriate for this type of government, especially if you're going to have what's considered to be a weak mayor position. And so that's just one example of an area. Myself personally, as far as, or my professional opinion as far as a mayor needing veto power and all that, I don't think you need it to be effective. I don't. Because at the end of the day, and I forget who said it, absolute authority is not really a good thing to have either, because depending upon who's sitting there, and then we got to look historically over time what is going on too. We can't forget about our past. We don't want to repeat it, but we don't want a dictator sitting in the seat because I got the veto power. I don't care what y'all think about it. Here's what's going to happen. That wouldn't be good either. So I'm more of, let's right the ship in terms of our government employees, and you can do that through a good city manager. And if you're going to call them administrator, at least give them the authority to be able to do some things, and let's spell out what that authority is. Now, on the flip side of that, we had a situation where, as you may recall, raises were given out to just select individuals and so forth under specific authority that's in the charter that allows one to do so. That needs to be looked at, because when you're talking about from a financial standpoint, and the financial stewards is the commission, and the ultimate responsibility doesn't come down to the mayor, come down to the commission, then that would be something that I wouldn't be favor of the city administrator having.
So no, can't give out raises, but can hire and fire?
Should have the ability to recommend, absolutely. And the approval authority would come through the commission. Now, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and you can show me the justification. And if we have the funds that are available to do so, I don't think that there's any commissioner up there that don't want to take care of their employees. But the problem is, we don't have an evaluation system in place. We just recently have done that. And a lot of times people have been dismissed from this government, and you won't see a single thing in their record about what they did. It became a situation where it was a personal preferences versus professional performance. That's a problem. So you got to correct those types of things. And as I go through this charter, this is pretty thick. There's a lot of different other things that may seem small that you can amend and modify to help this government move past where we are. Because again, this was done in 1996. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who the framers and authors of this was. And so basically what this charter does is what it was intended to do. Cause conflict. The commission is divided. So now we're trying to work within that framework to figure out how we're going to get all this done. And so you get folks that come in to run for mayor that don't know all this and think, oh yeah, we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and we're going to run Augusta and this is, well, no, you got to realize the not the fallacy or the fantasy of how you think government should run. You better know specifically how it is to run, and then how you can be effective with a not so perfect charter that governs us.
Would you like for that charter to be changed so that we do have a strong mayor rather than a weak mayor?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I don't think that that's a deal breaker. But I do think the city administrator portion is a deal breaker, and it could cause us to still see some of the things with the wrong people in place. It could cause us to see some of the things that we currently see. But thankfully, even though that we didn't address the charter, we did address in terms of what we're looking for in an administrator and their credentials and how they should, types of conversations they should have with commissioners and looking at the whole versus the part. We did address that. But there seems to be an issue in this community, and that's why I say Alvin Mason doesn't have an issue not having a veto or anything like that, because in essence, you do have inherent authority and you do have implied authority, because at the end of the day, there's only one signature. Only one. Well, excuse me, there's two signatures that goes on our procurement and our outsourcing of contracts. The mayor and the clerk of commission. You won't find a commission signature on any contract or business in the city, period. Only one, and that's the mayor. Now, I'm not saying that that's a veto or this or that, but I'm saying there is some inherent authority there, and expressly implied authority, because he or she is the signing authority for the city. So there's things that a person could do, he or she who becomes mayor, within this framework that can still work. Now, what I would be an advocate for, because I don't want Alvin Mason to make this decision, but here's what I would advocate for. I would advocate for it to go on a referendum on a ballot. And on a general election, not on one of these special call deals where you get special interest groups to come out and say yay or nay. But on a general election, when the majority of folks are voting and say, hey, would you like to see the government structure change in Augusta Richmond County to a strong mayor? Strong mayor is one who has a vote or a veto. Or would you like to see it change to a management form of government, a city manager versus an administrator? and let those that are responsible for our government decide versus one person or 10 people on the commission or 7 to 8 state reps and our state representatives. Let the majority of the people say, hey, look, here's what I want. Here's what I think we need to have. We've had X amount of years at this or this way or that way, and put it on the referendum.
Will you determine if you've been successful, and what KPIs will you use during your mayorship to judge that?
Well, pretty much how I've judged my entire life. Pretty much how I've judged it through growing up as a kid, coming out of projects, to, you know, getting into the military, to becoming an elected official. I would never even dream, my dreams didn't go that far. My dreams stopped well before ever even thinking I'd ever become an elected official or anything like that. But I do an assessment of myself and say, did I give my all to the job? Was I as honest and forthcoming as I could possibly be? Did I represent the will of the people? Did I give every opportunity possible through communications and real dialogue to get people on one accord, or at least to be able to agree to disagree? Did I give everything that's in my repertoire, that's in my toolkit, to be able to make that happen? And if the answer is yes, and it may be no for somebody else, but if that answer is yes, that I believe that I've done everything that I can do, I put my best foot forward, I made that assessment, then I will think that I've done the best that I can do. How history will determine me, even through this seat or anything else that I've done in life, will be just that. It's, when you break it up, it's his story, somebody's story about how it goes, and people will add to or take away from. But one of the reasons why I can go home at night and sleep is because I've exhibited, even on this commission, that I have the intestinal fortitude to request those things that need to be requested, or deny those things that have no business coming my way. I'll just tell you very simply, when it came my way for the bribe for the Tea Center, and I took them to the sheriff, $1.5 million is a lot of money, but I'm not going to be like this in my decision-making process, being handcuffed and doing something that's outside the will of the people. And so people will know and should know at this point that you can't come to me like that. You can come to me honest, with an honest deal. Let's put it on the table, let's see what's going on, and then I'll make my decision from that. So as long as I continue just to do and have those morals and values that I know that are important to me. And let me describe leadership one more time, not that definition. There's an acronym that we use in the military. It's actually LDRSHIP. That's leadership. The L piece is the loyalty to whom you serve. The D is the duty to do that which is right. The R is the respect piece, trying to be as respectful in the execution of your duties and the execution of your fellow commissioners and mayors' duties. The S piece is so important. I've talked about selfless service, not selfish service. I've talked about giving back. As I remember my first year, he used X amount of gas. Well, I'm not going to let that affect me in doing my job. Here, you can have the gas card. I'll show you that I can still do this job without this little bit of money that generally comes into somebody. So for 6 years, I haven't used it. That's selfless service. $45,000 in my money going back to the community. Selfless service. The honor. That's the H piece of that. The I piece is the integrity. And then the P is the personal courage to be able to do the hard, what some people call the hard right thing. That's the leadership that I bring to the table, as far as in my own life and as far as a commissioner in my public life, the way that I've executed my duties in Augusta, Richmond County. That's extremely important. That's what I live and breathe. I'm still doing it for the federal government out at Fort Gordon, and that's embedded in me. So there's not going to be any difference. People say, how differently will you govern? Well, first of all, your basic principles that guide you don't change if they're right. And that's what I go off of to help guide me in the execution of these duties. And guess what, folks? At the end of the day, if Alvin Mason doesn't make mayor, I'm okay. And I want to share this quick story with you if I can. In 1989, I was stationed at Fort McPherson in Atlanta. It was called Forces Command, FORSCOM then. General Colin Powell was our post commander. I'm sure everybody's familiar with General Powell. This was before he went up to Reagan's cabinet. And he called me over. We were at an intramural game, And he called me over, he said, come here, son, do you know who I am? I said, yes, sir, everybody knows who you are, you know. And he said, I've been watching you. Now I'm getting scared. I said, watching me? He said, yeah, I've been watching you. He said, now let me tell you something. He said, now, in life, you're going to gain a lot of positions and you're going to gain a lot of titles. And I'm thinking, me? You know, I'm just coming from the projects of Lansing, Michigan. He said, yeah, you will. He said, but let me tell you something. Don't ever allow yourself to covet a position or title, because just as sure as you gain these positions or titles, you're going to lose them, either through attrition, retirement, being fired, or whatever the case may be. You'll lose them. So if you have allowed your ego to have gotten out of whack because of your position or title, you're going to have a problem with yourself. And I was like, whoa. He said, so I see something in you, and you're going to gain positions and titles, but don't ever covet that position or title. If it happens, do the best job that you can do. If it doesn't, still be the best person that you are, because not only do you have to know who you are before you put a title in front of your name, he said you got to know whose you are. And if you know those two things, it doesn't matter what position you find yourself in, you'll continue to execute with the principles and morals and values that's been instilled in you. That was 27 years ago.
So when we look back though at Augusta, what 3 things are we going to say Mason did this? You know, what are we going to attribute to you? What are the 3 primary goals you want to achieve while you're in office?
1, more open and transparent government for everyone. From open records to allowing the government to have or allowing our citizens to have a voice in this government. 2, we will continue to strive with economic development and growth. There's no 2 ways about it. I've been a very strong participant in the Cyber Command and the talks. I'm the elected representative for Fort Gordon. I told you I started my career at Fort Gordon. I ended my career at Fort Gordon. I am a product of Fort Gordon, and I now work on Fort Gordon. I represent Fort Gordon. So bringing the Cyber Command here, that's going to change the way Augusta's viewed. Most people don't even understand how big that is for not only the state of Georgia, but specifically for Augusta Richmond County. And what that's going to do, that's going to cause our tax base to increase. There's no more housing that's going to be built on Fort Gordon, so our housing market is going to increase. That means more taxes are going to come into the city so that we can stay out of your pockets. We'll have to create more venues such as eateries and business, commercial and retail entities, even in the south end of town where 70% of the land to be developed on. We're bringing in all of these cyber contractors that have to have an office, that have to have residual folks, not just high-tech folks, but your administrative folks and your folks to clean up and this sort of thing. So it creates even more jobs. That's all going to happen under the next watch of whomever it is that's going to be the next mayor. What vision that you have and what part that you play in that is going to be so extremely critical for the southwest end of Augusta and Columbia County, and then the south end of Augusta, because that's where the growth is going to happen. So you're going to see that as a mantra as well. And then, and this is probably what I'm most proud of, you're going to have a guy who says what he means and means what he says. I think this community is looking for that. Not someone who's going to straddle the fence, not someone who's going to necessarily sugarcoat. We're going to be professional and articulate in how we, present ourselves as a whole. There's no question about it. But you'll have someone that can take the reins, that can make decisions, that will have his factual data with him. I'm meticulous. I'm attention to detail. I'm very data oriented to ensure that I'm doing the right thing every time. And so those are some characteristics or qualities or things that, to me, that you'll see that I think is important as we move forward to bringing Augusta, to the next level of where we need to be. Should I get that opportunity on May 20th? Should I not? I'll be a very, very concerned citizen and try to help out whomever it is that I can, because there's certain things that this experience knows that could be beneficial to whomever goes into this seat, and I would be willing to have those types of conversations and dialogue. Don't mean they have to take everything, but if you don't know, it'd be important to talk to someone who does know, that can kind of point you in the right direction. And then you take whatever you feel is necessary, or if you say, I don't need to hear that, okay, then that's fine too. But in order for us to get to where we need to be, there's a knowledge and experience base that's important there. So we shouldn't continue to do the same things we've always done. And we should not have that disconnect between the mayor's office and the county commission. And that's what causes us to do this. And so we can change that by taking that disconnect away. As a matter of fact, not since 1981, 1980, have we had a commissioner to be elected mayor, and that was Ed McIntyre, who understood what it was like to be a commissioner and a mayor. And a lot of times, regardless of what happened with him, a lot of times he was like, that was, he was able to cross lines, and, the commission was a lot, more cordial at that time, and sort of, he understood from being a former commissioner, a councilman, what they go through and what their jobs are. We haven't had that since then. If you stop and think about the mayors since then, none of them have had any previous experience as a commissioner, period. And if you look at that time frame, that's where we've had a lot of discord, a disconnect between that office and the commission. So how do we change that? We don't need to have that disconnect anymore. Here's an opportunity to change that with this election. And we tried everything else. I'm just asking to give an opportunity to try this, and I'll put my best foot forward.